Zet die mij zo dik.
To join us. We want to give it just one more minute to see if anyone else will join us. You're quite welcome to let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. We'd love to know where you're from, if you're from the Caribbean or elsewhere. And I'm just going to give it one more minute to actually begin so that we can have more people come on, if you don't mind. So in the meantime, this is a very interactive session. We'd love, especially when it's a small group, so we'd love for you to, if you'd like to put on your video, that's great. If not, you can keep it off, but you can also write into the chat, say hello, or tell us where you're from.
I see, I recognize two names already, who I know are not in the Caribbean. So Sabina and Adrian, welcome. Two celebrities already, so.
Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Hi, Sabina.
Hello. Good to see you. I need to find out how to operate this Zoom. Is completely different from what I had before. I will mute myself now.
How is it different?
Sorry, that's my dog. I need to mute my thing.
Okay, so we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I am Julianne Russo. I'm originally from Jamaica, currently living in Italy. I am the founder of the Caribbean Aquaculture Network, which is an organization trying to promote aquaculture in the Caribbean. And we do current talks, seminars, and anything Instagram lives just to find out who is working in aquaculture in the Caribbean. We recently formed a network for women. So you're happy to join us on our next networking. So for today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Metselaar. I hope I pronounced it right.
Yeah, that's correct.
He is our guest speaker today. He's an aquatic veterinarian, and I'm going to have him introduce himself for those who don't know him. And just a disclaimer, this presentation is recorded, and you will be able to see the recording on our YouTube, which I'd like for you to subscribe to and follow. So welcome, Dr. Matt.
Thank you very much. So I'll just share my screen now and get the presentation started. So there you go. See if I can see the chat still. Yeah, so I'll have the chat in there as well. So yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. As I said, I already know a few of the people on the call today. Melissa, I haven't met yet, but I see you're from Colombia. So I'm due to visit your country soon. So I'll be going there for tilapia business in middle of June, so might be able to see you there. So the question that was asked for me is sort of preventing bacterial disease, and given the time frame, I had to be a bit creative with how I approach this. So I already was introduced, but just wanted to say my background. So I'm a veterinary specialized in fish. Got about 20 years of experience in fish medicine, multiple species, including tilapia, salmonids, and ornamentals, but I do some sort of other species as well. So what I try to do is apply my knowledge to most species, and it doesn't really matter what species you are. You can usually apply the similar things to them, where there's some specifics to some species. But so I held various roles in pharmaceutical companies and clinical roles, but all in aquaculture. I've never been what I would call a normal vet. I've done dogs and cats for I've done it for 6 months, but that wasn't really a job. So I've always been a fish vet as such, and the founder of Aquatic Vets, which is a specialist aquatic veterinary practice for fish, and I'm operating worldwide at the moment. So what I'm trying to do today is look a bit in detail, and what we're going to talk about is and how we can do that. I'm going to give some examples, but we're going to look at what a more holistic approach to disease management, and hopefully that will be appropriate. For those that want to ask questions, please sort of interrupt me when you need it. I might sort of put them towards the end, or sort of divert them to the slides I've been prepared. You can also stick it in the chat, because I should be able to see it there as well. Well, chat's in the way. How are we going to prevent bacterial disease then? So you either already have disease on the farm, or you don't have disease on the farm. So and the latter is usually the case where you haven't started your farm yet, because in my experience, most farms have some disease, one or another. So if you already have disease or if you don't have disease on your site, biosecurity is one that's been mentioned already. But where are your risks? Because that's the thing that we need to look at. It's all a sort of a risk game, risk management, and how can you mitigate these risks? A question that's not asked often by the vet, which I think is needed to be asked, is how much money should I spend on mitigating these risks? Because that's usually where you have issues with production, because veterinarians are usually subject to the production manager, which says, well, the production manager usually has the last say. But how effective are these measures as well? So there's a nice picture of this is a salmon farm. Couldn't find one of a tropical tilapia farm, but the concept still applies to that. So when you are growing animals, when in aquaculture, you have a lot of threats coming at you. So there's quite a few things that are coming from the outside onto the farm. So the biggest risk that I think that's there is the fish that you hold on site. So because they are the ones that are actually carrying disease, and those are the ones that are your product. If you are to bring any fish into your farm, they will be most likely to bring disease into the farm as well. So that, in my opinion, is the most primary source of any infection in the in your farm. And the main thing is that most farms rely on getting fish from, even if it's within their own company, they will still rely on fish coming from outside the farm boundary onto the farm. There's only a few now that are sort of coming to the point that they are big enough that they can do everything in a single site, but that's very rare, and definitely not the standard. After that, water is the other thing, because any disease, or most of the disease, can transmit through water. So your water source will become a primary source of infection, and depending on how you do it. The other thing, staff and visitors. Visitors, I have a secondary, because staff are usually less watched. Staff move from one side to another side, and they're although they have the best intention, if they're in a rush, they usually negate all the biosecurity measures that you've put in place. So that's a big risk, but I haven't numbered that one, because I think the following ones you can have in any order you want, but and it's definitely not a list that is sort of extended to being all inclusive. there will be much more out there that can be a risk to your thing. Equipment, depending on if you share it or not. Some of the smaller farms have no choice but to share equipment. And again, because you're handling fish in that mucus and scales and whatnot, will sort of hang around this equipment and therefore can be a transmitter of disease vector. Live feed, especially in marine culture, there's still a need for live feeds. That's mainly because of the juveniles. You can't really get away from live feeds for now. Of course, when a species gets established, that need is less and less so, because they start using other techniques to get around and getting better feeds. You see that in RAS coming through now as well, where the feeds are getting better, but there's still some need for live feed. And live feed are particularly known for carrying parasites and viral infections and whatnot. So because they don't get heated to pellet food is getting heated to a temperature that most pathogens don't survive. So it's a much more reliable source to be pathogen free. Predators and wildlife, depending on where you culture in the world. So here around Scotland, we have seals going in. There's other South Africa, you got big sea lions which can jump over the fence. I was in Zimbabwe the other day, and they had big alligators or crocodiles, 6-meter crocodiles, going into the cages. The cages were far enough to have the hippos not venture there, but the hippos were more a threat to the workers. But everywhere around the world, there's some predator that sort of tries to get to your fish, because it's a lovely combined sort of pool of snacks that you have there. So, as I said, fish are the most important source for your disease. So, having said that, what you can do is you can look at specific pathogen-free fish, and what is the difference between a specific pathogen-free and disease-free is that SPF is only tested for 10, or depending on what the specific stands for, it's only disease-free for the diseases that have been tested. That doesn't mean that it's free of diseases that isn't tested for, or free of diseases that aren't known. So you can still transmit disease even if you buy SPF fish. SPR is a more recent way of thinking, is whereas the fish are genetically selected to be resistant to certain diseases. Again, it's SPR, so it is specific to certain diseases, and the downside of some of these are that if you start doing genetic selection, one, it's very slow to get any gain. Some gains are quicker. So, for instance, Ph.D. in salmon, it was located on a single genus, so it was pretty quick to select for that. But for things like Streptococcus, it's been taking a lot longer. And specific pathogen resistance doesn't mean that they can't get the disease. It's just taking more effort to get the disease. So none of these will actually solve the disease status on your farm, but can certainly help with that. So what's the source? And this is a very brief overview, but you should look at this. So open water pens are, of course, the most vulnerable, because fish can come from any direction. River water is a little bit better, because if there's no fish farms upstream, or there's no species in the waterway that could be transmitting disease, it's something more reliable. You could be high up in the river, where that sort of doesn't really play any importance. So if you're at the source of the water, little spring, that is often a good place to start your farm. And you can also treat that water coming in. So a lot of farms that have this model have UV or ozone on the water source, to negate that. But again, that's also not 100% certain, because ozone and UV need to be at very high doses. And if there's any bypass of the glass in the UV isn't clear, you can still get some pathogens coming through. Well water is one step up, whereas you get it out of the ground, meaning that it's unlikely to have pathogen in it, but you can still have certain things like nitrate in there. So there's still not necessarily a transmittable disease, but you still have the opportunity to have some issues with that. So testing the water from the well is very important. You need to have enough water coming out of that as well. Recirculation systems is one step up, where you control the water conditions much better. You are in control of your water filtration. Most will still operate on a sort of 5% replenishment, so every day they will replace about 5% of water, which gets us back to where you get your water from. Usually that's from tap water or from well water, meaning that you have a good control of that. But once you get something into a recirculation system, it's harder to get it out, meaning that you have to be more careful with the fish you buy in. And what we often see is that the fish that are being bought are having disease, which is causing most RAS systems to either fail at some point or at least be challenged in the way they operate. So cost of disease, and I think that's something that's very important. If you know the cost of disease, you know the budget for controlling it, because there's no point having a method of controlling whatever disease you're trying to control costing more than the actual disease. And that's very important to know, because if you're having a discussion with your former mentioned production manager, where you say, okay, I want to prevent this disease, but it's going to cost me like 4 pence per vaccination. You have to justify that to your production manager, saying like, well, it's costing you 8 pence per fish if you lose them. So this particular case that I'm showing is a graph of mortality, and that doesn't really mean anything until you have absolute numbers, because if this is a case of 40 of 100,000 fish, that's actually not a high mortality. But in this case, it was 57% mortality. So quite high percentage mortality. This is a TLV outbreak. And it was estimated to cost about $26,000 for that particular one incident. So that's showing you that if you, with a bit of data, you can do a lot more in the conversation with your production manager. So is it enough to keep it out? So as I said, new RAS systems stand a chance because the way they're set up, but depending on the species, or not depending on the species, I have not seen a source of fish that is 100% disease-free. So there are some good sources for tilapia and salmon. There are very much near 100% disease-free. But I think the evidence is still clear, saying that no matter what you do, at some point you will have a disease challenge in your system. So it's better to be prepared, or at least to look for solutions to combat disease on your farm. And in that sense, prevention is better than the cure. But what is health and what is disease? So is absence of disease or symptoms health? Is it normal or natural behavior health? Optimum growth? These are all things that we can relate to health. And one thing that's very important, feed conversion rate, because that's ultimately what's going to be the driver for your farm to be economical. So a feed conversion rate that's gone down by 0.1 can cost a lot of money, and that could be due to disease. So a feed conversion rate that's good can also be an indicator of health. Because if it was disease present, your feed conversion ratio would go up, or it will, at least in some cases. So presence of pathogen, is that disease? And we'll talk about that a little bit further on. Lack of immune response, which is sometimes the case in certain diseases. And how does disease start? Is it a pathogen or is it something else? Because what I think it happens is because we're in an aquaculture system, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of stresses coming from all directions. And it's not necessarily the pathogen alone that causes the disease. There's other factors that can be surrounding that. So looking at other factors, for instance, ammonia, stress handling, pumping of fish, lack of predators, taking away all those stresses could also be a way of combating disease by not getting it into the system. So just a brief sort of summary of some diseases in tilapia: Flavocolumnaris, Streptococcus, Francisella, Hella, which is the red egg disease. These are a number of bacterial infections in tilapia. We can go on, and there's a lot more there. But especially the top three, those are very important diseases in tilapia. And I wanted to go a little bit into strategies that you can do for that. So bacterial diseases, for those that don't know, Streptococcus is not one Streptococcus. There's quite a lot of it. It grows in standard TSA and blood agar, so it's easy to grow for you. So you can actually do that on the farm yourself. And that's very important to know. And Adrian probably can adhere to this a little bit, because there's different serotypes, and it's important that you know which serotype you have on your farm, if indeed you have it, because knowing what you have will help you combat it. So this is a wee overview. You can see the video of the fish. This is a experimental infected fish. This fish we know we infected with the Streptococcus agalactia 1A. Not that any of the other ones look different, but just to let you know. And it's divided in certain serotypes or in other classes. So there's more than one way of clustering diseases, and this is very much a scientific way of doing it, which is not that important when you're on the farm, but it is important to have understanding of the serotype, because that's important when you come to combat it. As you can see, there's some countries being mentioned. So what you have is a picture of South America. I had a picture of Asia as well. But what you see is that there's changes going about. So it was in previous years when it all started, it was pretty clear. For instance, in Central America, Streptococcus 1B was the main cause of disease. ADA Eclector 1A was in Asia, but that's changing. Although, why is that? Well, there's supposed to come another picture, but at least what we see now is that all these serotypes are moving around the world. So it's not necessary that if you're in Central America that you have 1B. It's very possible that you have 1A or an E as well. And that's due to transport of fish going around the world. So although what's Adrian saying? Yeah, that's it. But there's some other things going on with that, is that it's being brought around the whole world. So understanding what's going on is very important to you. There are some commercial vaccines, and Adrian might be able to tell us some that he might be working on. I'm not sure, so I hadn't included that, but which is an oversight, because AQUACULTURE Pharma, now owned by Vibro, Verbeck, sorry, do have a strep vaccine available as well. So you have a few vaccines now that are available, and again, you need to know which one, because if you use the wrong vaccine, it will not actually give you protection, because you don't have cross protection between, or at least not full cross protection between these serotypes. So that's very good to know. But other things that you can do, as I mentioned, presence of pathogen doesn't equal disease. So what you can do it's very much a disease management is a balancing act. So it's tipping the scale into where your fish aren't getting sick. So having pathogens present doesn't mean that you have a disease outbreak. If you have the fish at optimal conditions, if the oxygen is nice, if they're growing well, if the stocking density is low. So things like management of your fish, if there is a disease outbreak, don't go and sort of start grading the fish, because you just invigorate the disease. And if you have to treat, what you can do is you can have an antibiogram guided treatment. So make sure that the antibiotic that you use, if you are using it, is the correct one. And only do that for the first time, because you have then isolated the pathogen, and you can start vaccinating for the next batch. You can start asking your supplier of fish to start genetically selecting for SPR fish. So all these things will help, where you can tip the balance towards a better and improved quality of environment for the fish, and where the pathogen is being reduced by your biosecurity measures, and that sort of helps you understand the importance of this whole system to manage your disease. Unfortunately, there's no golden bullet, so you will have to start thinking in multiple senses. There's nothing in a bottle that's going to do everything. So you will have to be inventive, and as a lot of small things that will make a big difference. And that's where I'm gonna end it. So if there are any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Matt. I have a question.
Yep.
So, how do you recommend, my question is, how can you find out the stereotypes, for instance?
So the stereotypes, you got a few ways. I mentioned blood agar to grow them on. So the different stereotypes will have different patterns of hemolytic surroundings. So when you grow them on blood agar, you can see from some of the growth patterns which stereotype will be. The other way is you have some agglutination tests, but this is a thing that you'll send to the lab, and you'll ask the lab to do that for you. And if your current lab can't do it, you might ask them to do it somewhere else. But you can buy kits to do it, but your lab will do that for you.
So that's the question I have. Like, can you buy these kits? Because
Yeah.
I'm not sure about we don't have any representatives, but the limitation of labs to be able to test for this. We don't really have any aquatic veterinarians. So I'm not sure how many, the lab that they have, if they know how to test for it. So a farmer can buy a kit and test himself?
In principle, they can, but in practical terms, it's not that simple. So there's a few ways around that in such that if you're working with, for instance, if you have strep and you want to have a solution, so people like Adrian will be able to supply you a vaccine, but they will also be able to provide you some support in that sense. MSD Pharmac will do the same thing, whereas your sales rep will be able to assist you with that, because they have labs within their company to do that. The other option would be to go to a reference lab, because the technology that we're using for this isn't different from chickens or pigs or whatnot. So the technology is pretty standard. I need to check, because we're working on a PCR that could differentiate, but I'm not sure how far they got with that. Would be a very standard test to do that. You just need to order the right primers.
Because the thing is, if they're importing, what's the procedure for importation? So if they're importing, then is strep the most important thing to test for? What would be the key bacteria to test for?
So importing fish is a very tricky thing, and it depends on which side of the border you're on. So the provider of the fish will push for the minimum, because the government that imports the fish will set the rules on what is required, and that's usually according to OIE regulation. So the problem with OIE regulation is that they ask you to do diseases that are not necessarily relevant for tilapia. So they'll ask for salmon anemia, so ISA, a few other things. So all the notifiable diseases for fish, and most of those are not actually in tilapia. So you already had the supplier or whoever is paying for it already has to do quite a few tests that aren't relevant. So they're not that keen to test for these things for the importation purpose. So, and I'd like to separate those, because to import fish, the farmer and the supplier, I think, should always ask for the minimum. However, that doesn't stop you from testing more diseases, but they don't have to go on the import certificate. So for instance,
the cost as well.
Well, the cost, but strep, tilapia, lake virus, there's a few, but just depending on how many tests you want to do, because if you look at the statistics, to do a proper job, you need to test 150 fish to detect anything that's present for 2% or more.
Right.
So it's even at 150 fish, you're not going to pick up a very low presence of disease. And if you have to do that for quite a few diseases, you're talking about 20-30 grand testing.
Just not affordable in the Caribbean.
No, that's it. But the thing is, and that's where your supplier comes into hand. I'm working with a particular company, which I'm not going to name because that would be inappropriate. But they have a health program, so they have a closed nucleus where they supply their fish from. They haven't put any new fish in, because I said the risk of a fish incoming is very high. So what they've done, they've not imported any fish. They're on well water, and they have been so for 10 years. So, and in those 10 years, they've always been testing, and they have a biannual testing where they do spend $20,000 to $30,000 on testing, and they have done so for 10 years. So they can say with some certainty that they don't have disease on the site. So, and that's where I think you need to look for in a supplier, not a supplier that has fish coming in every now and then,
Right.
and a supplier that sort of only tests for the one batch you send for 1 or 2 diseases with 20 fish. So.
And this would be really important also for the ornamental fish farmers who are always importing, and sometimes they have problems because of, having the reputable supplier, and then when it arrives, and then also the aspect of antibiotics. We're trying to get away from the use of antibiotics. Is antibiotics regulated in tilapia? I know it is in the US. Can you speak on that?
Regulation is so most sort of first world countries have regulated antibiotics because of their importance. My opinion on antibiotics and the opinion of most bigger companies now is that the use of antibiotics is not desirable. 2 ways: one is public perception, and 2, the use of it is actually, by the time you have to use antibiotics, it's already too late. So antibiotics only goes into the fish that eat, because we usually put it in through the feed. So you still have high mortalities, and the cost of it, although it's relatively cheap to do it, because it's a kilo of Oxytet, it's about, was that $125 dollars. So it's not that expensive, but it's the whole thing around it. So prevention is very much possible. I work with quite a few companies that have a 0 antibiotic policy, and they manage fine doing that. But it's that mindset that you have to change, and you have to start working on the environment, not having those fish subject to ammonia and a few other things, and choosing your selecting that. And you can move away from antibiotics by using disinfectants, for instance. Virkon is a good example of that. Vibrio in shrimp is being combated with Virkon or similar products in the ponds.
Can you type that in the chat? That name?
Yeah, it's the main product is Virkon. There's another product called PUR. It was actually Sanocare PUR, I think, which is PUR, but it's a potassium monopersulfate. Monopersulfate, which is the active. It's a triple salt. It produces some chlorine and an oxidization in the water, and what it does is it reduces the bacterial loading. So what it's basically what you're doing with these approaches is you kill all the bad bacteria by a product like Virkon, and then you add probiotics. So it's like the Yakult effect after cleansing, and it's that sort of approach that's been looked at.
Right. Thank you for those who have just joined. We are in our question and answer session. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, I know that you missed the talk, but Jessica, I think, and somebody else that just joined, do you have any questions? You can either turn your video or unmute your mic or put in the chat if you have any questions. Don't be shy. This is a very interactive talk. I'd like it to be. So I'll continue asking questions. In terms of, like the Caribbean and some of our farmers, we have a lot of small farmers. You talked a lot about vaccines and probiotics and immunostimulants. How affordable are those for our Caribbean small farmers, do you think?
So the cost of these products has to be seen in the sort of sphere of how much do they actually give you back. So a lot of these products will come with sales rep, and a sales rep is always there to sell you the product. But most of these products that have been mentioned have quite a lot of data behind them. So it's a matter of trying a lot of these things and seeing if it actually does anything for you. The problem with a lot of these things is that it's small things that do add up. So you need to do a lot of these small things before you start thinking. So there's a lot of things you can do for free that are helping you. So as I said, management, handling, a lot of these don't cost money. And when you start talking about reducing stocking density, that's where you start to change the business model. But again, all of that is surrounding data. So I certainly think it's affordable, but there's a cost to it, and the cost needs to outweigh, or the benefit needs to outweigh the cost, and that's very difficult to say. But if you don't try, it won't help you. But profit margins, a lot of these smaller farms are very tight, and therefore it's difficult to get out of that cycle. But if there's a will, there's a way. And if you're committed to that and have sort of eye for detail, these products will start making a difference to your facility.
Right. So for most of a lot of the farms, you would have to say that management is the number one to prevent bacterial disease from exploding. Yeah. So management is a very, very important thing. So being aware what's going on, being able to stop an outbreak pretty quickly. So as I said, bacterial loading. So if you have high bacterial loading, so if you, for instance, if you have old equipment, it's more difficult to disinfect that. So the bacterial loading will be higher. So for instance, painting the tanks every now and then to keep up that sort of cleaner look, cleaning everything much more will reduce your bacterial loading, which be one item of it. Reducing stress by for instance, covering half of the tank, either to give shade or to not have that stress of predators that may be circling above. It's things like that don't have to cost a lot of money, but
can make a difference. But it's all in the detail, and the more you pay attention to that detail, the more you will gain from that.
Right, absolutely. I think that's what we really have to emphasize a lot on. Even the smallest things like the foot baths and allowing people onto the farm, and just being more careful that way.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter if you then buy a batch of diseased fish from abroad. So it's that sort of yeah, it's important, but once you establish a very clean source or a reliable source, those things start to matter, and that's when you come to the really small problems. The big problems are quite quickly resolved, in my opinion, and they don't usually tend to cost a lot of money. It's the smaller issues that are tending to cost more money, and therefore you'll start to have to balance that with how much effort you have to put into to do that. Yeah.
Right. Any questions, anybody? No questions? For those who joined, can you tell us in the chat where you're joining from, if you can? We'd like to know where you're calling from.
If you have, because I always, it's difficult to discuss any issues you have on the farm in an open webinar, because that's you don't want to air your dirty laundry. I'm just writing my my things in the thanks, Adrian. So I have written my my details in there. So if you have any questions after the webinar or issues you want to discuss, I'm always quite happy to have a chat with you, either on Zoom or WhatsApp or Line, whatever thing you prefer. My details are in the chat, and then we can have a further discussion on trying to resolve the issues you have on your site.
That would be great. I'm also putting my information in the chat, where we are going to be having more talks, and would love for you to join us. I'm trying to find us back again.
Actually spelled my own email address wrong, because I'm a man, I can't do two things at the same time. So it's aquaticvets.com, so not aquaculture.com. So.
Oh, hi, Olive. Thank you for joining. I think you're the only Jamaican on the call. You want to get information on rearing shrimp. Well, can you send me a message and we can see what we can do about that? But if you have any questions on tropical diseases for today, please go ahead and ask or put it in the chat. And also, this going to be put on our YouTube, so I'd really like if you could subscribe and share for the future. Just one more, and if you'd like to share your email with the group, that's okay. You can go ahead and do that also.
Just subscribe to your MailChimp. So
right, exactly, for our future. And I'm just going to put one more information here. Sorry.
So Olive, you said all your fish have died. Do you know what they died of? Okay, so the question is do you have a diagnostic center? Is there any diagnostic center in Jamaica that you can send your fish?
I don't think we do, but they do have the Ministry of Agriculture. You can correct me, Olive. The Ministry of Agriculture, but I know we don't have any fish vets at the moment. So what I recommend is to take a picture, maybe, and send it to you.
Yeah. So WhatsApp or whatever you have, it usually works on that phone number. And if not, you can email me and ask for that. The one thing that we also offer, and there's more people that offer that, but if you want, you can send sample to us and we can have a look at that. And that's sometimes good to have it abroad. You might have to not necessarily smuggle it out, but send it to the just by post. And then we do what they call histopathology on that. It's in such a way, it's about, just to give you an indication of price, to do one fish is about 80 pounds, which is about $100, which seems expensive. But if you have a lot of fish that are dying, as with olive, that is really helpful, because then you can start treating that fish. For instance, if olive had streptococcus, he could then sort of purchase Lab lake virus is a serious issue, Melissa. That's so the picture I showed was from tilapia lake virus. It's been around for a long time, a lot longer than people are expecting, because it's being spread around by movements of fish, we think. So there's a paper by Dong Ha or Ha Dong that describe that potential risk. Once you have it, it's difficult to get away from it, but it's easy to resolve that by changing your source of fish. So if you want to have a talk about that, Melissa, drop me a line, and we can have a talk about that. And also, because you're in Colombia, I'm not sure for which company you work or your own company, there is a tilapia conference coming up. I'm not the host, no host of that, but there's definitely potential for you to maybe be there. Yeah, good.
So please email me if you have any questions. We have one late person coming in.
Better late than never.
Right? That's the thing with these talks, there's register but come late. So hello Luis, thank you for joining us. We have finished our talk and we are almost at the end of our Q&A. So before we wrap up, Luis, do you have any questions you'd like to ask Dr. Matt on tropical bacterial diseases for tilapia, ornamental fish, or any other tropical fish? Otherwise, please email. We have the email in the chat. Please email him for any questions that you have. Also, if you could subscribe to our organization, Caribbean Aquaculture Network. We have one last message.
That's me.
So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Matt, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And we hope to have you again if you wanted to come back and give us any more information, perhaps at a later time, because I know 11 o'clock Jamaica time is a work day. So if you're willing to stay up late.
yeah, that's possible. And you guys don't wake up early, do you?
No.
So I'll do my best.
Right, we can do another presentation, but late at night. But anyway, this is going to be on our YouTube, so please go ahead and check it out. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you taking your time. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.